Okay, fifth grade. So here is part 2 of 13.3 for our chapter 13, England and the British Isles. Okay, so the beginning of modern England then occurred. Now, this time we now have King Henry VIII who was leading England. Okay, and this was when the Bible Reformation was starting. England was reforming because of the Bible. And the important that is really important for us to know, because this is when the colonists that went to Canada and the United States brought over the heritage of the Bible. Okay, it was during the English Reformation. Okay, so now what's happening is John Cabot was one of the first explorers to go ahead and reach North America for England. So King Henry VIII allowed people to go out. They were trying to look for the new land, and John Cabot was one of the first. Okay, and then after King Henry VIII, we have his daughter, Queen Elizabeth, and that's where we start the lineage of Queen Elizabeth. The first was the daughter of King Henry VIII, and she took over, and this era was called the Elizabethan age, okay, after Elizabeth, okay? And during this time, she too wanted to be able to let people explore. And so she was allowing explorers to go out. And during this time, so was Spain. Okay, so many explorers were going to the New World, including Sir Francis Drake. Okay, he was the first Englishman to sail around the New World. Okay, around the whole world. Okay, I know I'm kind of like jumping around here, but I'll pause it and you guys can get all of your notes at the end. Okay, so during this time, Sir Francis Drake, who was sailing around the world, we also have Sir Walter Raleigh, and you guys got to remember him from last year because we learned about how he founded the lost colony at Roanoke Island in North Carolina. And so remember the lost colony where the people went, and then when some of the sailors left, went back to England to get supplies, they came back and like the colony was disappeared. Remember that lost colony? So that was founded by Sir Walter Raleigh. And so this was all during Queen Elizabeth's reign, during the Elizabethan age, okay? And during this time, this is when the Spanish started to fight with Queen Elizabeth, and the Queen Elizabeth's fleets actually defeated the Spanish Armada. Now, which was one of the greatest naval forces that the world have ever seen, but they ended up fighting through a terrible storm, and many of the ships were like crumbled into pieces and everything. And it's funny because the Spanish king kind of said, I sent my ships to fight against men, but not against the winds and waves of God. So he kind of saw how, massive and control God has over, the wind and the waves, and he noticed that. It's kind of funny. Now, during the Elizabethan age, we also have William Shakespeare, and he was the greatest writer of the Elizabethan age. Okay, obviously we know Romeo and Juliet, we know a ton of his work, and he just was an amazing, great writer that just produced so much that we still read today, which is really neat. And then where are we at? Okay, so now during this time, right after Queen Elizabeth, we then have the age of the Puritans. Okay, so now during this time, during the Queen Elizabeth's time, the Bible was getting more and more known, okay? And it was changing England, okay? The Bible was changing England, okay? And that's why I have that up here, okay? And the reason why is it was getting people to be kinder. It was taking greediness away. People were trying to the England became a people of the book, and the book was the Bible. Okay, so this was an important time for England. They were following the Bible, and it was becoming a time where the church was rising up. The Church of England was rising up. Okay, now during the age of the Puritans, what happened is there was a group of people that basically thought that the Church of England was becoming like the Roman Catholic Church, and they didn't want to be part of that. So you have the Puritans, and they wanted to purify the Church of England. But then you had another group called the Separatists, okay? And they wanted to separate entirely from the Church of England. Okay. Now, if you remember this from last year when we were learning about how they were leaving England and coming over and how America started, you would know that that was when the Separatists came over. Okay. So the Separatists actually were one of the group of people that was one of the group of people of the Separatists that came over to the New World during the reign of King James the First. That was actually the Pilgrims. So here we got, remember that? I don't know if you guys remember from last year, but the Pilgrims were actually the Separatists trying to get away from the Church of England, okay? And so then we have, during that same time, or right after that time of King James the First, we have then King James King Charles the First, and during that time is when there was actually, he was leading more of the people instead of, remember the Magna Carta that we just learned about, and where it was by the people for the people, and they were kind of leading, but he was kind of more leading and the nation at the time. And so there was a group there that wanted to separate too, and they felt like he wasn't following Magna Carta, which was the laws set by for the land, and a civil war broke out, and that was between the loyal parties of the king, and then also the Roundheads is what they called them. And so Oliver Cromwell, he was the leader of the Roundheads during that time, and so he was leading to go ahead and basically against the king, because the king was not following basically the Magna Carta and the laws of the land and how things were set up. Okay, so now during this Puritan time, this was the time where some really unique things started happening in England, and that is when John Bunyan, which was a poor thinker, okay, wrote one of the beloved books that you guys have heard about called The Pilgrim's Progress, okay? And then during this time, we also have the Puritans and science, because over in Italy, Galileo was kind of going over and learning all about science and learning about the great discoveries that make heaven. And so then during this time is when we have some of the great discoveries come from England, and that was one certain Isaac Newton, who discovered the law of gravity, Francis Bacon, who devised the scientific method. We also have William Gilbert, who wrote the first English science book, and then we have William Harvey, who discovered the circulation of the blood in the body. We have Robert Boyle, which was the father of modern chemistry, and we have Edmund Halley, or Hawley, however they would say it at that time, was the astronomer who predicted Halley's Comet, Okay, that's why I know it was Haley. And then Robert Hooke, the first man who basically could see a living cell. So during the Puritan age is when a lot of science started up and a lot of discoveries started happening. Some of the methods and things that we learn in science today, which is really unique. That was during the Puritan age. So there's a lot of different ages that went through England. And so we started off with the early days, then we started in modern England, then we had the Elizabethan age, and then we have the age of the Puritans, and that's where we're gonna lead off. And so you guys should end reading on page 206 at 13b, and this is your notes for that. So if you have any questions regarding this, please let me know. And now you guys should go ahead and do your worksheet, which is quiz 23 as a worksheet. It also has a couple of questions from Geography Facts 14, which you read last week. Okay? If you have questions, let me know. And I'm going to get out of your way so you could get your notes. So press pause.